A war veteran named Ethan Cole, once a battlefield medic, now cleans the silent halls of St. Gabriel Hospital with his loyal dog, Rex. A soldier forgotten by the world, but not by God. In the middle of a Boston blizzard, the only son of a powerful businessman lies dying, after over 100 elite doctors have failed to save him. But when everyone surrenders, Ethan sees what no one else can. The doctors mock him. "You're just a janitor." But Ethan's soldier instinct and faith uncover a deadly secret. A poison hidden in plain sight, and a system built on arrogance. What began as a dying boy's tragedy becomes a miracle that shakes the entire hospital, proving that sometimes God sends heroes wearing scars, not stethoscopes. Boston wore winter like an old oath, kept, heavy, unarguable. Plows ground the streets into pale rivers and parked cars slouched beneath white saddles, while the harbor breathed steam and the church bells sounded like coins dropped into the cold. St. Gabriel Medical Center rose from the frost like a steel chapel, all glass and right angles and lights that refused to sleep. Inside its corridors, the air held two kinds of silence: the antiseptic hush of expensive machines and the anxious quiet of people who had run out of answers. Ethan Cole moved through that quiet with a mop in his hands and a German shepherd at heel. He was 45, built like a doorframe, and carried himself as if gravity owed him respect. The jacket said maintenance. The posture said other things: night patrols and forward aid stations and the calculus of seconds you can't afford to spend twice. Rex, his dog, was the color of winter bark, with a lightning-shaped scar over one shoulder, and the tolerant patience of a creature who had learned that human beings break, mend, and break again, but keep walking anyway. The rumor made its rounds even where rumors weren't supposed to. A 9-year-old boy in the VIP wing, a famous last name with dangerous gravity, 3 weeks of decline and no diagnosis. 100 physicians, they said, Harvard, Hopkins, Zurich, had marched their letters into the room and come out lighter by a few certainties. The boy was Tommy Russo, only son of Vincent Russo, a businessman whose money moved with the weather and whose anger could change it. Ethan didn't seek gossip. It came like wind. He didn't seek God either. He assumed God had already found him and was politely waiting in the stairwell, as usual. He pushed the mop along and watched the floor shine behind him, a small mercy in fluorescent increments. Outside the VIP door, voices bucked and collided like sleet against a pane. "It's autoimmune," said one. "Mitochondrial," said another. "Idiopathic," someone tried, which is a Greek word that means we're out of nouns. Dr. Peterson, the chief, wore his confidence like a starched collar. "We escalate steroids," he announced. "We have escalated," a fellow snapped, and the argument flared again, quick and tidy. Rex sat, one ear up, doing the scent arithmetic of fear. Caffeine, latex, antiseptic, pride. In the back row of Ethan's mind, a projector flickered, dust blowing sideways under a lamp, a canvas cot, a boy's hand shaking out of rhythm with his breath. Kandahar. The gums had carried a blue-gray whisper. The hair had thinned not in clumps, but in indecent symmetry. The pain sharpened after meals and fell back like a tide when food was withheld. Thallium, the old assassin, the jewelry ghost, the rat's inheritance. It had come in on a convoy, powdered into a family's bread. They only found it because somebody said its name like a prayer with good aim. The memory ended the way some prayers do. With work, Ethan's hand tightened on the mop handle until the wood creaked. He had promised himself, when he took this job, that he'd let the white coats be sailors of their own seas. He would sweep the decks and keep the light bulbs warm and carry water where water needed carrying. But the boy cried out, a small sound that cut the ward in two, and orders given long ago under worse lights came back like footsteps he recognized. If you can save a life, you move. Rank is for after. Ethan set the mop into the bucket, rolled his shoulder once as if weighing it, and knocked on the VIP door. A dozen faces swiveled as if the room itself had a neck. "Sir," Dr. Peterson said in a tone that had escorted many people away from many thresholds. "This area is restricted." "I know," Ethan said mildly. He lifted gloved fingers, clean, respectful, and bent near the child without touching him. Hair thinning in bands, not patches. Paresthesia starts in the toes and fingers. Pain worse after eating. Easier when fasting. He angled a penlight, saw what he feared he'd see. Blue-gray line at the gum margin. Peterson made the noise inflated certainty makes when it meets something it did not invite. "We do not crowdsource diagnoses." "Neither do I," Ethan said. "We ask the problem for its real name." He looked up and let the word fall between them like a plumb line. "Thallium." The room went delicate. Rounds were halted in mid-syllable. The monitors continued their small electronic heartbeats, faithful metronomes of the obvious. "Rat poison," a resident whispered, half horrified, half hopeful. "Industrial," another added, as if offering a last rites footnote. "Absurd," Peterson said, but the words sagged. The door opened again, and Vincent Russo entered with the restrained violence of a man guarding his only map. He wasn't tall, but he took up the part of the room money could not occupy. Presence, grief, and the terrible competence of those who make things happen. "What did you say?" he asked. And it wasn't to Peterson. It was to the man with the mop and the eyes that spoke in field prescriptions. "Thallium," Ethan repeated. "A urine test confirms it fast. If I'm wrong, I'll mop the harbor. If I'm right, we lost 3 weeks to the wrong kind of pride." Rex, without theater, slid closer to the bed, lay down, and put his chin on his paws, as if to say to the boy, "Stay. We can hold this line a while." Vincent looked at Ethan the way Winter looks at the ocean. Hard, measuring, honest. He didn't ask for committee opinions or proof of pedigree. He said, "Run the test," and the room moved, grateful to have an order worth obeying. 47 minutes with Winter teeth. Ethan waited in the hallway where the wall paint still remembered donors by name. He watched a nurse tuck boredom around panic the way you tuck a sheet around a restless sleeper. He listened to the elevator breathe. He told himself a joke, quietly. A janitor walks into a ward and leaves his mop with a diagnosis, and decided he'd never tell it to anyone. Rex bumped his knee with the crown of his head. "Yeah," Ethan whispered, rubbing the dog's ears. "I know." The results arrived like a verdict late to its own hearing. Thallium, 15 times normal. Silence often shouts at hospitals. This one sang. It made quick work of 100 consultations and cleared a path for simple, unfancy medicine. Orders barked. Chelators came up like cavalry. Fluids were hung, potassium corrected, monitors steadied, and somewhere behind the screens a little boy's body chose, with enormous bravery, to keep being a little boy. Dr. Peterson stared at the numbers as if they were a confession written in his own handwriting. "I wrote protocols about considering heavy metals in obscure neurologic." He stopped, opened and closed his hands. "I forgot," he said finally. And it was the most expensive sentence he'd ever spoken. Ethan shrugged, gentle. People forget. Pride remembers for them, not always helpfully. Vincent came out from behind the partition and stood in front of Ethan as one soldier meets another. The two men did not shake hands yet. They exchanged the briefest nod, a treaty older than contracts. Then Vincent dropped to one knee. The corridor gasped. Wealth does many improbable things. Kneeling is rarely among them. "You saved my son," Vincent said, voice like gravel under snow. "How do I keep him saved?" "We keep treating, and we keep our eyes open," Ethan said. "Poison doesn't walk in by itself. You think it was deliberate. I think when a child gets the old assassin, somebody invited it to dinner." Vincent's face closed around an idea like a fist. He looked past Ethan at Rex. The dog lifted his head in solemn greeting. "Good dog," Vincent said, which in that moment comprehended more than it sounded like. A slow thaw crept back onto Tommy's lips. The boy slept the way children are supposed to sleep, with his hand open as if he had just given away a pebble to a friend and didn't miss it at all. Nurses adjusted lines and numbers and hope. The city leaned closer to its windows to peer at the snow, which still fell with an almost theological stubbornness. Later, Ethan took the service elevator down, the one that smelled like bleach, rubber, and 2 decades of unremarkable miracles. When the door opened at the lobby, Dr. Miranda Walsh stood texting, her posture that of a practiced winner. She glanced up, inventoried him, and smiled without warming. "Congratulations," she said. "The newspapers will adore the headline, 'Janitor corrects 100 doctors.'" "Headlines prefer heroes," Ethan said. "I prefer outcomes. Outcomes are a function of process. Then our process should include humility." Her smile sharpened by a millimeter. "We are very protective of standards here." "So am I," Ethan said. "Mine. Start with children breathing." Rex rose into view beside him. Miranda's eyes touched the scar on the dog's shoulder and came back cold. "Good night, Mr. Cole." "Good night, Doctor." She walked away with the unnecessary crispness of a person who likes to be watched. Ethan watched the floor numbers over the elevator instead. He felt the old tug in his chest, the rope that tied his past to anybody's danger. "We're back on duty," he told Rex softly. The dog thumped his tail once, the quiet drumbeat of consent. In the chapel off the lobby, small, bare, undecorated except for a wooden cross that suggested a map more than a destination, Ethan paused. He did not kneel. The knees had other plans these days. He did not ask for a miracle. He had just seen the ordinary kind, which is a truth named in time. He said, "Thank you," which is the shortest and most complete theology he owned, and went back to work, because the floor in the 3rd corridor had forgotten how to shine, and somebody needed to remind it. Morning broke in Boston without light. Only a gray whisper that slid over the Charles River and into the tall windows of St. Gabriel Medical Center. The snow had stopped, but it left behind a kind of silence that stuck to the glass. Inside, the world smelled of iodine, burnt coffee, and the faint metallic scent of redemption. Ethan Cole had been awake all night. The former Army medic, once Captain Cole of the 75th Combat Medical Battalion, now sat on a wooden bench outside the pediatric ICU, his mop forgotten against the wall. His hands were calloused, fingers swollen from years of pressure and sutures, but they moved delicately as he poured coffee into a paper cup for himself and water into a bowl for Rex. The German shepherd, now 10 years old, drank slowly, ears twitching at every sound that dared disturb the sterile quiet. His fur was gray around the muzzle, the silver of experience. He'd lost part of his hearing in an explosion near Kandahar, and one of his hind legs still bore a thin surgical scar. But his eyes, amber and unyielding, remained sharp as a compass needle. Ethan's gaze shifted to the small observation window. Inside the room lay Tommy Russo, pale but breathing evenly now. Wires ran like threads of fate from his small chest to the monitors that beeped in mechanical rhythm. By his bedside sat Vincent Russo, the boy's father, still in yesterday's suit, tie loosened, his forehead bowed into his clasped hands. Once a titan of construction and shipping, Vincent now looked more like a man carved out of exhaustion than marble. The kind of man who had lost many battles but couldn't afford to lose this one. Dr. Peterson appeared from the other end of the hallway. His white coat was wrinkled, his silver hair slightly undone, a rare admission of chaos from a man who usually gleamed like glass. His eyes found Ethan and narrowed with the discomfort of someone who owed an apology, but hadn't learned the mechanics of humility. "Mr. Cole," he said, clearing his throat. "The boy's responding. You were right about the thallium." Ethan nodded. "It wasn't about being right, Doctor. It was about listening." Peterson hesitated. "I forgot the basics. We chase prestige here, not possibilities." "War teaches you that possibilities save lives," Ethan replied softly. "Prestige doesn't." The doctor lingered, then walked away, leaving Ethan and Rex alone again. From inside the room, Vincent lifted his head and gestured for Ethan to enter. Tommy looked smaller up close, his freckles faded, eyelashes trembling with half-dreams. Machines whispered his secrets in digital code. Vincent stood, a weary strength returning to his stance. "You saved him," he said simply. "I diagnosed him," Ethan corrected. "God saved him." Vincent's lips twitched, a near smile, the kind that cost a man like him effort. "Either way, I owe you my son's life and a question." Ethan tilted his head. "Go ahead." "How did you know what none of them did?" "Because I've seen it before," Ethan said. "In a village where no one spoke English, where a boy the same age as Tommy died in my arms because the antidote arrived too late. I promised myself that if I ever saw those signs again, I'd call it by name before pride could kill anyone else." Rex gave a small grunt, as if echoing that vow. Vincent looked down at the dog. "And this soldier of yours?" "Rex was my partner overseas," Ethan said, scratching the shepherd's neck. "He's been blown up, shot at, starved, and still thinks people are mostly worth saving. I take my cues from him." A nurse entered then, a tall woman in her late 30s with chestnut hair tied into a bun and kind eyes dulled by fatigue. Her name tag read, "Nurse Clara Evans." "Vitals are stabilizing, Mr. Russo," she said. "The toxin levels are dropping. He's going to make it." Her voice trembled slightly, perhaps from relief, or from the realization that a janitor had done what Harvard-trained physicians hadn't. Vincent placed a hand over hers briefly. "Thank you, nurse." Clara nodded, adjusted Tommy's blanket, and left, passing Dr. Miranda Walsh in the doorway. Walsh was elegance under pressure. Mid-40s, tall, slender, with hair the color of expensive ink and eyes like scalpel blades. She was one of the hospital's most celebrated pediatric specialists, known for her precision, her immaculate reputation, and the faint perfume of authority that trailed behind her. She smiled at Vincent with professional warmth, but when her eyes landed on Ethan, the smile cooled by several degrees. "So," she said, voice soft as paper, "our janitor turned doctor saved the day." Ethan met her gaze evenly. "Just saw something you missed." "We didn't miss it," she countered, smoothing her coat. "We ruled it out. Big difference." "Only if the patient dies," Ethan said, not unkindly. Walsh's nostrils flared, but she said nothing. She turned to Vincent. "The boy will recover, but I'd like to run further tests. to ensure there's no residual damage. Vincent nodded. Whatever he needs. When she left, her heels clicked too sharply against the tile. Rex's ears flicked back, a low rumble starting deep in his chest. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's back. Easy, boy. That night, Ethan returned to his small apartment above a hardware store a few blocks from the hospital. The building was old brick, the kind that kept its ghosts warm. His room was simple. 2 chairs, a cot, a Bible with dog-eared pages, and Rex's bed by the radiator. Snow fell again outside, painting the world in temporary forgiveness. Ethan sat by the window, tracing condensation with a finger. The smell of bleach still clung to him, but beneath it was another scent, the faint trace of thallium on a test strip he'd pocketed earlier. He knew poisons left trails, and men who wanted children dead rarely stopped at one attempt. Rex shifted restlessly in his sleep, legs twitching, perhaps chasing old memories of deserts and orders. Ethan leaned down and murmured, "We're not done, partner." The next morning, the hospital buzzed like a hive shaken awake. News had spread. The Russo boy was recovering. Reporters began to circle the gates like crows looking for miracles. Dr. Peterson avoided cameras. Miranda Walsh, however, stepped into them willingly, delivering statements about teamwork and collective success. Ethan watched from a distance, a faint frown beneath the shadow of his cap. When the crowd dispersed, Vincent approached him outside the staff entrance. His driver waited by a black SUV dusted in snow. "You were right again," Vincent said. "The tests show traces of thallium in the boy's IV bag." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That means someone put it there." Vincent nodded grimly. "Someone inside." "I figured," Ethan said. "The poison wasn't the last part of this story." Vincent exhaled white breath. "You planning to find who did it?" Ethan looked down at Rex, whose tail gave one slow sweep through the frost. "I already started." That night, Ethan returned to the hospital under the pretense of cleaning duty. His ID card still worked on most doors, and years of habit made him invisible. He moved silently, Rex beside him, the sound of claws faint against the linoleum. In the storage room near the pediatric wing, he found what he was looking for: an open cabinet, vials labeled with missing serial numbers, and a faint perfume that didn't belong to cleaning supplies. He sniffed, recognizing the same scent from Dr. Walsh's coat. "Rex," he whispered, "we've got a problem." The shepherd gave a low bark. Once, the signal for confirmation. Ethan smiled grimly. "Thought so." He picked up one of the tampered vials, sealed it in a glove, and slid it into his pocket. Tomorrow, he would give it to Vincent Russo, not the police. Men like Vincent understood swifter justice. As he turned to leave, footsteps echoed faintly down the corridor. Measured, deliberate. Ethan froze, motioned Rex to stay still. A shadow passed under the doorframe, then faded. Whoever it was, they knew where to walk without being seen. When Ethan finally stepped outside, the wind slapped him like an old sergeant. Snow gathered on his shoulders, melted, froze again. He looked at the hospital's glowing windows and whispered, "God, if I'm right, help me name the next poison before it spreads." Rex pressed against his leg, warm and solid in the cold, and together they walked into the falling snow. The next few days brought sunlight, the thin kind that only winter understands, a white reflection bouncing off frozen streets, too cold to warm anything. Inside St. Gabriel Medical Center, life began to pretend everything was back to normal. The news of the miraculous recovery of Tommy Russo had turned the hospital into a parade ground of praise and paperwork. Cameras were gone now, and so were the reporters. But in the corners where the light didn't reach, unease stayed. Ethan Cole pushed his cart down the east corridor, mopping quietly, the same rhythm as always. His jacket read maintenance, but his eyes read recon. Rex, the 10-year-old German shepherd, walked beside him, nose twitching, tail held low, scanning every passing scent the way soldiers scan rooftops. The dog had learned the rhythm of his partner's silence. They moved as one, unremarkable, invisible. Behind the closed doors of the pediatric wing, the boy he'd saved was recovering. Every time Ethan passed the window, Tommy was sitting up a little more, eyes brighter, hair growing back in uneven tufts. Sometimes the boy waved. Ethan always lifted a hand in return, and Rex would wag his tail, a quiet salute to life. The miracle was complete, but the war wasn't over. Ethan had found the tampered IV bag 2 nights ago, and the faint trace of perfume that reminded him of Dr. Miranda Walsh. He hadn't told anyone yet, not even Vincent Russo, though the thought of that conversation weighed heavy. Vincent was a man whose gratitude could turn into vengeance faster than a trigger. Ethan knew justice wasn't always clean when filtered through men like that. That morning, as he rolled the cart past the staff lounge, Nurse Clara Evans waved him over. Clara, slender, with auburn hair always in a bun and eyes that carried too much empathy for a place like this, was pouring coffee into a chipped mug. She had the quiet exhaustion of someone who saw too many small tragedies and never learned to grow numb to them. "You haven't slept, have you?" she asked. "Not really," Ethan said. "Old habits." "Old wars?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Same thing." Clara lowered her voice. "People are talking about the IV bag. They're saying you're stirring trouble. You should be careful, Ethan. Dr. Walsh doesn't like to be questioned." "I'm not questioning her," Ethan said evenly. "Just watching." "That might be worse," Clara murmured. As he left, Rex nudged her hand affectionately. She smiled down at him, whispering, "Take care of your stubborn human, all right?" Rex gave a single soft bark, which in dog language might have meant always. That afternoon, Ethan slipped into the maintenance office and opened his locker. Inside was a small metal box, old and dented, labeled Cole, Medic. He unlocked it with a key he wore on a cord around his neck. Inside lay the tools of a different life: a compact camera, 2 field notebooks, a pen light, and a small recorder, with scuffed buttons. War relics repurposed for civilian ghosts. He attached the camera to the janitor's cart. Hidden beneath the waste bin rim, lens angled upward toward the hallway intersection near the medication prep room. Then he waited. He knew Walsh's routine now. Long hours, late-night rounds, always alone. The woman had precision down to an art form, but her silence was louder than her steps. When night came, the hospital changed shape. Lights dimmed, monitors beeped softer, voices lowered. Ethan pushed his cart as usual, whistling softly so the few remaining nurses wouldn't suspect anything. Rex trotted beside him, tail flicking, nostrils flaring. Near the supply room, footsteps approached, measured, deliberate. The camera caught the image first. Dr. Miranda Walsh entering the medication storage area. She moved with practiced confidence, checking over her shoulder once before opening the refrigerated cabinet. Ethan, standing around the corner, pretended to wipe the baseboard, listening. He heard the faint sound of glass vials clinking and paper crinkling. Then a whisper. 2 down. 5 left. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He risked a glance around the corner. Walsh was transferring small vials into her pocket, then sealing the cabinet again. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes glowed with something sharp, cold intention. She exited quickly, her heels echoing through the hall, vanishing into the stairwell. Ethan exhaled slowly, then crouched by Rex. "You got that?" he whispered. Rex blinked up at him. The dog's camera harness light blinked once. Recording confirmed. The next morning, Ethan met Vincent Russo in the hospital parking lot. Snow crunched underfoot, and their breath steamed like smoke. Vincent was wearing a long wool coat, scarf wrapped tight, his dark hair slicked back but his face drawn. "You said you had something," Vincent said. Ethan handed him a small USB drive. "Security footage from last night." Vincent's brow furrowed as he pocketed it. "Who?" Ethan looked past him at the horizon where the morning sun struggled through the gray. "Dr. Walsh?" For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then Vincent spoke, low and dangerous. "She'll pay." "Not yet," Ethan said sharply. "We do this right. If you move too soon, she'll vanish, and others with her." "You think she's not alone?" Ethan nodded. "Nobody poisons children for one paycheck. This smells like business." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Then we finish it." Later that evening, Ethan sat in the chapel again. It was empty except for a few flickering candles and a janitor who didn't look like a saint, but prayed like one. Rex lay beside him, chin on paws, eyes half closed. Ethan whispered, "If there's a hell god, I've seen it. It's not fire. It's people who stop caring. If you're listening, help me keep caring long enough to do this right." Rex made a soft sound. A dog's amen. As they left the chapel, the hospital felt different. More eyes, more whispers. Ethan noticed people glancing at him and quickly looking away. The camera must have been found. He realized someone had tampered with his locker. The padlock was scratched. Someone knew he was digging. That night, he stayed inside the hospital instead of going home. He and Rex camped out in the basement maintenance room. The hum of the boilers sounded almost like wind through a desert tent. Ethan sat on a crate, checking his gear, recorder, spare batteries, flashlight. "We're close, boy," he murmured, "but close means dangerous." Rex's ears twitched. A faint sound. Footsteps in the hallway above. The dog's hackles rose. Ethan stood, flashlight ready, and moved toward the door. As he opened it, a folded envelope slid under from the other side. No name, just 3 words written in clean handwriting. "You're being watched." He stepped into the corridor, sweeping the light across the floor. No one. Just the lingering scent of perfume, Miranda Walsh's perfume. He looked down at Rex, whose low growl rumbled like distant thunder. "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "I smell it too." They turned the lights off and waited in the dark, soldier and shepherd, shadows among shadows, knowing the next move would decide everything. Evening fell over Boston like a bruise. The city was gray and half asleep beneath the weight of another storm warning. At St. Gabriel Medical Center, the lights glowed through the windows like 100 tiny confessions, and inside, Ethan Cole was done waiting. For days, he'd been moving like a shadow through the hospital's arteries, cleaning the same halls but watching them with different eyes. He had collected more than suspicion now. He had a plan. The envelope that had slid under his door 3 nights ago still sat in his pocket, creased and fingerprinted. "You're being watched." The scent of Dr. Miranda Walsh's perfume lingered faintly on it, a subtle blend of lavender and iron. He didn't know if it was meant to intimidate him or warn him. Either way, it had done neither. It had only convinced him that whatever evil Walsh was involved in, she had help, and the help was watching both of them. Rex, his loyal shepherd, trotted beside him as he walked through the maintenance corridor at 2 a.m. The dog's fur shimmered in the half-light, his head low, nose working the air for the familiar trace of the doctor's scent. The hospital was quieter at this hour. The machines hummed softly. The floors gleamed with the reflection of empty light. Ethan had memorized every sound, every flicker, every routine. He had learned long ago in war that ambushes don't happen by accident. They happen when someone stops paying attention. He didn't intend to stop. That morning, Vincent Russo had called him into his car. The billionaire looked like a man wrapped in smoke, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, but with a kind of energy that could make men move mountains. "You sure you want to go through with this?" he'd asked. "She's not just a doctor. She's connected. People like that don't go down quietly." Ethan had watched the man's reflection in the car window, the city passing by in broken streaks of light. "War doesn't care about quiet," he'd said. "It cares about what's right. And what's right is catching whoever tried to kill your boy." Vincent nodded, silent for a long moment. "Then I'll make sure when she falls in front of everyone." Now, Ethan stood in the pediatric wing, just outside the same supply room where Walsh had been caught on camera. The maintenance cart was in place, equipped with a small recording device hidden beneath a can of disinfectant spray. A miniature camera was taped under a clipboard that hung on the wall. Rex sat near the door, appearing to rest, though his ears twitched at every sound. At 2:15 a.m., the first sound came, heels on tile, steady and confident. Dr. Miranda Walsh walked into the corridor, her white coat crisp, her black hair pinned perfectly. Her face, though beautiful in a cold, sculpted way, held an edge of arrogance, someone who never expected to be wrong. She glanced once around the hall and then entered the storage room. Ethan waited 15 seconds, then followed, keeping to the shadows. Through the crack in the door, he saw her remove another set of vials from the fridge, slide them into her pocket, and type something on her phone. Her voice was soft, clipped, almost prayer-like. "All 7 accounted for. The next deposit clears tomorrow. No mistakes this time." Ethan recorded every word. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. The sound startled her. She turned sharply, nearly dropping the vial. Her expression flickered from shock to composure in an instant. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," Ethan replied evenly. "Unless thallium's suddenly part of the hospital's vitamin plan." Walsh's eyes hardened. "You don't understand what you're playing with. I understand a child was poisoned under your care, and maybe more than one." Her hand slipped toward the counter, where a scalpel lay under a stack of papers. Ethan noticed but didn't move. Rex stood in the doorway now, a silent statue, his amber eyes locked on her. "Don't," Ethan said quietly. The tension thickened, electric and suffocating. Walsh's mask cracked for the first time. "You think you're some kind of savior? You're just a janitor with a hero complex. You don't know what this place really is." "Then tell me," Ethan said. "Because right now, it looks like hell wearing a white coat." For a moment, he thought she might confess. Instead, she smiled. A strange, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You wouldn't believe me if I did." The door opened behind them. Dr. Peterson stepped in, pale and nervous. He looked from Ethan to Walsh. "What's going on?" Ethan held up his phone. "Proof. Of everything." Peterson's gaze darted to Walsh, then back. His voice trembled. "You're making a mistake, Cole." "Am I?" Walsh moved suddenly, fast, reaching for the scalpel. Rex lunged before Ethan could react, grabbing her sleeve and forcing her backward. The scalpel clattered to the floor. Walsh screamed, half from fear, half from shock. Ethan pulled her arm free from Rex's grip before the dog could do more damage. "Don't," Ethan said again, his voice low but shaking with contained fury. "Don't make me the monster in your story." Peterson looked horrified. "This is insane." "It was insane when a child almost died," Ethan said. He looked straight at Peterson. "You knew, didn't you?" The man's silence answered him. Before Walsh could speak again, the door behind Peterson opened once more. Vincent Russo entered with 2 police officers. His presence filled the room like thunder. "No one leaves," he said. The officers stepped forward, and for the first time, Miranda Walsh's confidence faltered. "This is illegal," she stammered. "You can't—" Vincent held up a phone. On its screen, her recorded words played. "All 7 accounted for. The next deposit clears tomorrow." The sound filled the room like judgment. Peterson's face drained of color. "7?" he whispered. Walsh's voice turned sharp, desperate. "You think you're clean? You signed off on the lab reports?" Peterson took a step back, shaking his head. "I didn't know. Didn't want to know," Ethan said. Rex barked once, deep and commanding, as the officers moved forward. Miranda tried to push past them, but Vincent blocked her path. "You tried to kill my son," he said, his voice low and final. "You'll spend the rest of your life remembering his name." She looked at Ethan one last time, eyes blazing with hate and something like pity. "You think you stopped this?" she whispered. "You haven't even scratched the surface." They led her away. Peterson followed in silence, handcuffed, his reputation collapsing with every step. The hallway was quiet again, except for the hum of lights and Rex's steady breathing. Vincent turned to Ethan. "You did it." Ethan shook his head. "God did. I just cleaned up the mess." Vincent almost smiled. "You'll never have to work again. I'll see to that." Ethan knelt beside Rex, running a hand through the dog's fur. "I will," he said simply. "Someone's got to keep these floors clean." As Vincent left, snow began to fall outside, bright against the black sky. Ethan stood by the window, the reflection of his own tired face staring back. Rex pressed against his leg. 7 kids, Ethan murmured. 7 families. He looked up at the faint cross hanging at the end of the corridor. "Guess we've got more work, huh?" Rex wagged his tail softly. The next morning, the news exploded. "Doctor arrested in serial poisoning case. Janitor's discovery saves 7 children." But Ethan didn't read it. He was already back on his shift, pushing his cart down the long hallway where everything had begun, the sound of Rex's paws steady beside him, and the prayer on his lips quiet but alive. "Lord, help me see the next poison before it finds another child." Winter lingered longer that year, as if Boston itself refused to let go of the chill that had settled in its bones. The streets were sheets of glass, the harbor rimmed with ice. News vans lined the front of St. Gabriel Medical Center, their antennas rising like steel weeds from the snow. For weeks, the city couldn't stop whispering about the story that had cracked its halo, about the janitor who exposed the rot beneath the marble floors, about the doctor who poisoned innocents, and about the dog who seemed to know the truth before anyone else. Ethan Cole avoided the cameras. He kept cleaning the same halls he always had, mop in hand, Rex beside him, padding silently over tiles that had once seen fear and deceit. The hospital had changed. New management, new rules, new humility. But Ethan hadn't. He was still the man who started each day with a prayer that had no beginning and no end. Help me keep seeing what others overlook. When he entered the pediatric wing, nurses greeted him differently now. Some nodded with respect. Others looked away, ashamed they hadn't listened sooner. Nurse Clara Evans was one of the few who spoke openly. Her auburn hair was now loose, and her smile, though tired, was no longer guarded. "You should be proud, Ethan," she said one morning as she handed him coffee. "They're calling it the Cole Protocol. Every hospital in the country is adopting it. Mandatory toxicology screenings for unexplained pediatric cases." Ethan chuckled softly. "Guess miracles come with paperwork." Clara tilted her head. "You don't see it as a miracle?" He looked down at the steam curling from the cup, then at Rex, who was watching the hallway with the calm alertness of an old soldier. "It was," Ethan said. "Just not the kind people expect. The kind that starts with tragedy and ends with grace." She hesitated before speaking again. "They said Dr. Walsh confessed everything before sentencing. About the families who paid her, the children she was ordered to silence." Ethan nodded slowly. 7 families, he said. 7 graves that didn't have to exist. Sometimes the world doesn't need more medicine. It needs more courage. Outside, snow drifted past the windows in slow spirals, like feathers from an angel's broken wing. Later that week, Vincent Russo invited Ethan to a press conference, but Ethan refused. "You don't need me there," he told him. "You need the truth to speak for itself." Vincent, now clean-shaven and composed but visibly changed, insisted. "You brought light into darkness, Ethan. The city needs to see that heroes don't always wear uniforms." Ethan smiled faintly. "They usually wear scars." Instead of the press conference, Ethan spent that morning in the chapel. The pews were empty except for him. Rex curled up beside his boots. The cross above the altar caught the winter light just right. Half gold, half shadow. Ethan bowed his head. "I don't ask for thanks, Lord," he whispered. "Just keep the next fool like me brave enough to speak when pride gets loud again." The following month, Dr. Miranda Walsh stood trial. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, parents, and hospital officials. She wore prison orange instead of her usual white coat. Her once perfect hair was tied back, her sharp beauty dulled by defeat. Yet when her eyes met Ethan's across the room, they weren't full of hatred. They were full of something closer to resignation. She spoke only once before the sentencing. "You were right. I thought I was curing the world of corruption by purging its heirs. Turns out I was just another part of it." The judge sentenced her to life without parole. The gavel fell, and in that moment, Boston exhaled. Ethan stayed seated after everyone left, his hands resting on his knees. He wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about the 7 children who hadn't lived long enough to see their parents change, about the mothers who would sleep better, knowing their pain had a name, and about one small boy, Tommy Russo, who was still alive because one man refused to stay silent. Tommy visited him often now. The boy's energy had returned, and he followed Ethan everywhere like a shadow, Rex trotting happily beside him. "My dad says you're a hero," Tommy said one afternoon. Ethan smiled, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. "Your dad says that because he's your dad. Heroes are people who never stop trying to do the right thing, even when no one's watching. You'll understand that someday." Rex licked the boy's hand, tail wagging. Tommy laughed, a sound that melted more frost than the sun ever could. Months passed. Spring crept into the city shyly, melting the last stubborn patches of snow. The Cole Foundation for Medical Integrity opened its first office, funded by Vincent Russo, staffed by young doctors and nurses inspired by Ethan's story. Scholarships for veterans entering medicine, medical grants for low-income families, and rescue programs for retired service dogs all bore his name. When the mayor invited him to the ceremony, Ethan showed up wearing his old military jacket instead of a suit. He stood beside Vincent and Clara as the ribbon was cut. The crowd clapped, cameras flashed, and Ethan looked out over them, seeing not fame but faces of people who'd stopped believing that good could win. After the event, he found a quiet spot by the foundation's small garden where Rex was sniffing at tulips. Vincent joined him, his expression soft. "You know, I still think God sent you and that dog to save my boy." Ethan smiled, eyes on the flowers. "God sends everyone, Vincent. Some of us just show up with a mop instead of a miracle." They laughed quietly together, and for a rare moment, peace didn't feel like an illusion. That evening, Ethan returned home. The apartment above the hardware store felt warmer now. On his desk sat the old metal box he used to keep his medic gear in. Inside were just two things: his army patch and Rex's worn leather collar from the service days. He touched them both with the care of a man handling relics of faith. Outside, twilight turned the city to gold. Ethan opened the window, the cold air brushing against his scarred hands. Rex lay nearby, breathing steadily, already drifting into dreams. The world had quieted, but Ethan knew the work of faith never ended. Somewhere, another child would need saving, another truth would need naming. He whispered, "We did all right, partner." Rex's tail thumped once in reply. As the church bells tolled in the distance, Ethan closed his eyes and prayed. Not for himself, but for everyone who had forgotten that God still works in quiet ways, through ordinary hands, through broken men, and sometimes through dogs who never stopped believing in them. That night, Boston finally slept, and in the glow of a single candle on his windowsill, Ethan's reflection merged with Rex's in the glass. Two silhouettes that the world had once overlooked, now forever bound by one truth. When faith meets courage, even a janitor and his dog can change the world. In a world that often forgets where miracles come from, this story reminds us that God doesn't always send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends a weary soldier with a mop and a loyal dog with faith still burning in his eyes. Because miracles aren't just thunder in the sky. They're the quiet choices we make when no one's watching, the courage to speak truth, the mercy to forgive, and the hands that keep healing even when the world looks away. If this story touched your heart, share it so that others may believe that faith still moves mountains. Comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of grace, courage, and second chances. May God bless you, and may He walk beside you in every storm, just as He walked beside Ethan and Rex in theirs.